There's a huge disconnect between our modern view of slavery and how we project that back on historical slavery, in particular non-American historical slavery, and how slavery actually was seen and practiced and used in the ancient world. And this gives atheists a weapon to use against Christians who happen to be ignorant about actual slavery. We're going to address it here from the Bible. We're going to talk about what it means for us when we look at slavery and how to respond to those who criticize the Bible and criticize God and criticize Christians over the issue of slavery. You'll want to get your pen and paper, take notes, and then memorize, because you need to have this ready for you when you do have someone say, "What about slavery in the Bible?" You need to be ready to give them an answer for why you have the hope in Jesus Christ, and slavery is not an issue for you being in the Bible, in the text. And the text not being against slavery. And before you jump and start screaming and saying, "You racist, you slave proponent," I don't know what you'd say, but don't just start going off the handle and say, "Oh, you believe in slavery." I don't believe in your slavery. But the biblical slavery is a different thing. It's for a different purpose, and it's for a good purpose. And it actually is taught, those purposes are taught in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. The slavery was there to do what Jesus later taught in the Sermon on the Mount. It was fulfilling that purpose in society. One of the first things you have to get your head around is this, that in the Bible, individualism is not a value. It's not. In our modern culture, it's been enshrined as a god. Absolutely has. Absolutely. And especially among Christians. You have enshrined individualism as a god. In particular, Protestants. You need to reevaluate your view of God and Christianity and the church and the Bible. Because the Bible speaks very differently than what you advocate is Christian. The things that you take for granted, that you assume are Christian, are against what the Bible portrays as normal among his covenanted people. The you in the New Testament is almost exclusively plural. That means it's almost exclusively referring to a group of people, you all, from Southern English. It's rarely ever addressing a single individual. The Promised Land, when the Hebrews went into the Promised Land, they were given land by tribes, by the affiliation with a certain son of Israel, Jacob. Whoever they descended from. They weren't given it to them based on their individual identity, but based on their communal identity. Next thing is to consider what slavery was, the different categories of slaves. Because it wasn't just slaves where they went and they bought on the market, or they went and they captured someone willy-nilly out in the forest. That's not how it happened, or in the desert. There were slaves that were slaves because of debt. They were what we might call in more modern history indentured servants. Just a little different, though, in the ancient times. Wartime captives, prisoners of war, POW, household servants, and that's because they were indigent. They couldn't provide for themselves. They needed a home and a household to be in and live and have food. And so they became household servants, a slave. And then there were inherited foreign slaves. They had specific laws for these that you can find in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. Now, the thing that you need to understand is that slavery, the chief purpose, unifying purpose of slavery, was for mercy. That's right. It wasn't economic. There were economic benefits of having slaves, yes, for sure. But there was economic responsibility as well. And so the benefits helped to counterbalance the responsibilities and hopefully provide some additional profit. But it was chiefly for the sake of mercy. These people who were captured in war would have been put to death. But instead, they had the option of becoming slaves. These people who would have been homeless, indigent, were given the option of making a contract for 6 years, for example, and living in someone's household as their slave. And then in the 7th year being set free if they wanted. If they didn't want, they could then be made into a permanent slave. And there were specific laws around that. But it was an act of mercy. So slavery was a social tool for mercy in the context where the person was facing a very terrible option. It's very different than the American slave trade. The American slave trade wasn't like that at all. By then, that had become an economic pursuit. But that's not what slavery was in the ancient times. And when you realize that, and then you read the scriptures about slavery, and you keep it in mind that this is a social tool of mercy in these contexts where the person would have had a very terrible option, then you don't look at it as something that, oh, the Bible is supporting something immoral. No, it's actually supporting something moral. That we have recast, redefined, contrary to what it was then. We have superimposed our modern context of slavery onto ancient slavery. They're not the same. When you get that in your head, then that objection to the Bible and to God vanishes. It actually strengthens the case for the Bible and for God. Now, when we get to the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus calls for mercy and loving your enemies and generously lending and radical holiness. They echo this mercy-driven logic of Israel's servitude statutes. That those were put there to fulfill these very values that Jesus is drawing on to teach his Sermon on the Mount. They're not foreign. They're not different. They're not the opposite. The only reason those things would be seen as an opposite to that is if you are casting onto those a different definition, a different purpose and context for slavery. Just the word itself is a trigger word for us today. But we've made it that. Because we're ignorant. We are ignorant of the past. We are ignorant of the difference between slavery 2,000 years ago and slavery 200 years ago. The vast difference. You say, but slavery is slavery. No, it's not. If you're facing death at the sword and you have an option to become a slave in someone's house instead, that is mercy. Now, you might choose to die instead. I'd rather die than be a slave. Well, you could do that. That's an option. That doesn't make the option of slavery not a merciful tool to you, to give you the possibility of continuing to live. What kind of life is that? See, this is a moral argument from modern context. You are arguing based on individualism as a god. Life is not worth living if I cannot be my own god. Individualism is your god. This is echoing the mark of the beast, 666. We've talked about this before. Go have a look. 6 is the number of man. It says so. Some interpret that out of its context and say 6 is the number of a man, like an individual. It isn't. It's of man. 6 is man. That's a biblical concept. Why? Because man was created on the 6th day. That's why. 7 is completion. Why? Because God completed creation on the 7th day. When you have 3, it's divinity. And you have 6s 3 times, which is man in God's place. This is the great rebellion that came out of the humanism that led into the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment, and created a template of a type of man that's mentioned in Thessalonians. A man of lawlessness, not the man of lawlessness, a type of man who is lawless, who doesn't think that there's any law above him. He can evaluate everything, just like in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, when he, as a law student, thought that he was above the law because he was educated. And that education that we're given is humanist education that places the human being as the judge and arbiter of everything that you purvey, everything that you look at. That you judge it, you can evaluate it, and you can depend on that evaluation to be fair, just, honest, and true. You are your own God. You question everyone else's ability to discern truth, ability to judge justly, before you would even question your own. You have placed yourself as God. 666. You are walking around with the mark of the beast. You need the name of God on you, in the midst of your face. That's what it literally says. And on the receiving part of your hand, the palm of your hand. These are your actions. This is your perception, how you see the world, how you judge the world. You need to judge it through God's eyes, God's evaluation. Let Him judge it. You need to make your actions aligned with God's purposes. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So when we look at Jordan Peterson's answer in his recent debate, where he talks about slavery, tries to answer it, he tries to make it look like the Bible is all about anti-slavery and freeing from slavery. Well, there are the stories of that, like the greatest story in the Bible, outside of Jesus, of course, which is the Passover, where they are freed from the bondage in slavery in Egypt. But you might ask yourself, well, why did God let them be in slavery for 400 years or 350, depending on which text you look at? Hundreds of years they're in slavery and God did not free them. Why? If God is against slavery, why did He allow them to be in slavery for hundreds of years? His own chosen people. Good question, isn't it? But this solution is actually natural to the text, the one that I'm giving. And not only that, it doesn't depend on Greek philosophy, which is a Trojan horse smuggled into the church called apologetics. It doesn't depend on that. It depends merely on the text, understanding the text in context of what is slavery then. It has nothing to do with Greek philosophy. It's biblical. This is the answer that you need to be leaning on and depending on. So I hope that this has really blessed you. This has made you feel so much more at ease about this issue and comfortable about when someone might bring it up to you, that you can actually answer them. But you need to take this to heart and reflect on it. If you have any questions, write them in the comments down below. I'll answer them. May the Lord bless you as you seek Him with all your heart.